Coming up next, a look at the Delaware budget battle from both sides. Senator Greg Lavelle and Senator Brian Townsend. This is the Delaware Way. Welcome to the Delaware Way. I'm Larry Menti. Well, they had a budget battle this summer and a crisis was averted, but the long fight, that's still happening. To talk more about that is Senator Greg Lavelle, who is the minority whip. Thank you so much for coming back. Appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Always a pleasure.
Something that's related to the budget fight that I want to touch on, and it's, as we both agreed on, it's a little wonky, but I want to explain it to people so they understand what we're talking about. And that is the prevailing wage and how it affects the state budget. What is the prevailing wage?
Prevailing wage, simply stated, is a government mandate that says for government projects, you're going to pay the prevailing wage across trades. So historically and simply, they'll do a survey. They'll go to merit shop, non-union companies and say, how much do you pay an electrician? How much do you pay a plumber? Blah, blah, blah. They'll go to union shops, ask the same questions, come up with different numbers and take the average. And that would be the prevailing wage, which then must be paid on government contract construction projects. And through the regulatory changes that I've opposed, now there is no survey effectively, and the prevailing wage rate is the union rate. And across a number of trades, it's awfully expensive. I mean, we have semi-skilled trades making more than teachers.
There is this fight in Dover between Republicans and Democrats, and it seems to be that the Democrats want more revenue by raising the taxes, and the Republicans would rather cut costs first, almost exclusively, and it seems like there's no middle ground in that. That's a big fight when the prevailing wage becomes a fight.
You're right, and so what I like to say is when you're in a hole, stop digging, right? So stop making things more expensive than they are. Stop adding new programs. Review existing programs and see if they're working before you go out and ask people for more money. And prevailing wage is one of those battles.
How much money would it save if you were to, do you want to get rid of the prevailing wage?
No, you got to be a realist about these things. So while I and others may say it should be based on merit, I think what we need to do is reform the existing prevailing wage laws and reduce that regulatory burden. So what is happening now, Larry, is there's an effort to make it even more burdensome. So the rate is set, as we already discussed, at the union rate. There's regulations recently proposed that would expand the capture of that rate to other trades, to organizations that may do some government work, but may do mostly non-government work, and put some of those mandates on them. And it's going to make it more expensive.
Have you quantified this? How much money are we talking about?
It would be $100 million a year or more, depending on the year. We have a huge capital budget, like DelDOT's. The capital budget in Delaware is about $500 million. Now, obviously, there's a lot of materials in there. So about 30% of that, 30 to 40% of that is wages, and take 20% of that, and that would be your savings.
So it's a significant amount of money what you're talking about. How much do you think you could save?
It's real money, $100 million. You
could say, but you just said you don't want to get rid of the prevailing wage, but just by bringing it down or just by not expanding it?
By eliminating it, it would be 100 or so, depending on the year and those types of things. But that's not what you want to do. Well, because I don't think we can get that done.
Right.
But let's not make it worse. And that's what I think with some of these proposals that have come out recently, sort of, and come out in a very non-transparent way. A couple days after the General Assembly got out of session in July, suddenly there's a posting about a regulatory change to prevailing wage, a significant one, and they're going to have a public hearing on a Friday in Dover in July. That's not a...
Yeah, I get it. But this is an important point, though, because many times in the argument you hear this, it's going to save us $100 million. Well, it's not going to save $100 million because you're never going to get rid of it. So
you're going to save 50.
It could say 50. That's how much.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. Because many times you hear the argument and then you're just nibbling around the edges, and it ends up being $10 million.
Oh, sure, and I get that, and I'm guilty as charged. But let's actually do it. And what we did, we actually made this change on the what we call the community transportation funds, the street paving that legislators do. And depending on the year, it's a $16 to $20 million line item. And we were able to eliminate prevailing wage within that because the unions don't do that work, so they didn't really object. And we were able to save, I still think DelDOT's lowballing it, but 12 to 15%. So on a $20 million budget item, that's $2 million. That's real money.
Now, I read a story on Delaware Online about a posting about the prevailing wage law, and you were upset about the posting because I guess it changed the scope of the law without public hearings?
Well, so yeah, so there's a couple things that show that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing often in state government today. So there was a regulatory proposal that would have broadened the prevailing wage laws and expanded it, easily stated. And it came out a couple days, as I mentioned, after we got out of the session. So everyone's exhausted, recovering,
Right.
and suddenly on a Friday there's this posting that in 30 days there'll be a public hearing to have significant changes. So we objected. And we went to the governor's office and they said, well, we weren't aware of that, which is fairly interesting, right? So to the governor's credit, they pulled them back. It was a formal posting. They pulled them back and said, we will not do this hearing in July. And a couple weeks ago, about a week ago, it posted up as accepted. I called the governor's chief of staff again. He said, let me look into it. They got back and said, oh, that was a mistake. So, you know, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So we don't have a lot of trust.
What does it tell you? Is it that they believe this is a fait accompli, it's going to happen?
It tells me at the worst incompetence, at the best indifference. So I don't know what they're doing.
And who's incompetent and who's indifferent? Who are you talking
Someone
about?
in the Delaware Department of Labor, whoever manages this prevailing wage process. And if the governor's office, you know, we'd had this huge battle in the last session over prevailing wage, and literally 5 days after the session ends, they post up significant expanded prevailing wage laws. Are you not paying attention? Did you not? And apparently they weren't, because they didn't know.
Right.
So that means somebody within the Department of Labor is like, oh, let's slide this in, you know, and we'll have a hearing in July on a Friday in Dover. That's not serious.
So do you know who did it? Do you want accountability for that?
Well, I think Tony DeLuca is the person who heads that area up in the Department of Labor. But they're all accountable, the secretary and the governor. This makes things more expensive. It is a payback to the labor unions for the help that they get, financially and otherwise, in elections. And the taxpayers pay for it. And I'm not suggesting, Larry, that quality tradespeople who are skilled within those trades be paid minimum wage. That's just a farce, and that's an argument that I'll make back. I wouldn't have an incompetent electrician work in my house, and I don't want an incompetent electrician working on a state government job either.
Wonderful. I'm shaking your hand as if it's over, and it's not. We're going to do one more segment, and we'll continue to talk about the budget in a wider scope, getting past the prevailing wage, when we continue our conversation with Senator Greg Lavelle.